The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, when the Minister of Immigration, Mr Woodhouse, started to speak about this bill, I actually had high hopes for what the government was going to do. Now, I've been here long enough, perhaps, to have not been... I shouldn't have been so naive, Mr Speaker. But when the Minister, and here I've got his first statement in June 2013, new measures to combat migrant exploitation, he was going to make it, unlawful and exploitative behaviour would not be tolerated, and they'd crack down on unscrupulous employers. I thought this was really good. I thought, at last, the government is going to do something about a problem that every member of this House knows has existed for some time. And I know, because in my electorate of Mount Roskill, we have a high migrant population, and when you read the media stories about exploitation, sadly, a lot of those people are living in my electorate. And I thought, at last, the government is going to act, and the opposition, when this bill was introduced, reflected that optimism. We supported the bill. We went to the Select Committee with the intention of further strengthening it, getting it right, making a difference to stop the appalling abuse of human beings that happens too often, particularly where a migrant worker is here on a temporary visa. They do not they need the job. They're reluctant to speak out because they know that if they speak out, they'll be sacked. If they lose their job, they lose their right to be here. Everything works against them. But at last, the government was going to act. Unfortunately, Mr Speaker, when we went through the process of examining this bill, we found that the reality was quite different from the perception that the Minister was trying to portray. For a start, this bill is not predominantly about stopping exploitation of migrant workers. This bill is predominantly about making it easier for the government to deport the people that they want to deport. And secondly, it's about raiding the migrant levy to pay for things in infrastructure that normally tax would be required to pay for. Now, I want to talk on both aspects of what's wrong with this bill. For a start, the bill will be symbolic more than real, and for a number of different reasons. First of all, there is a lack of resources to detect the exploitation, and I'm going to come back to that. Secondly, there is a misplaced role on the part of the Immigration New Zealand. They are the ones that are working on the exploited labour. But actually, if you want the migrant workers to come forward, if you want them to speak out, they're often not going to come to the agency whose role it is to strictly enforce the provisions of the visa. They are going to be frightened of Immigration New Zealand. And if you had an enforcement role, surely you would have put that in the hands of the Labour Inspectorate, whose role it is to stop exploitation. That would have been the logical thing to do. And thirdly, Mr Speaker, there is too little protection for the migrant worker when they do speak out. I want to address each of those areas, but I want to come back to the question of the migrant levy. The migrant levy was imposed supposedly to help migrants settle more quickly and more easily in New Zealand. And God knows there is a need for resources to be applied in this area, for people to pick up fluency in English language. Absolutely critical. You have to have fluency in English language to be part of your wider community. Secondly, to help get a job. The critical issue that my ethnic communities talk to me about when they first arrive in New Zealand is getting on the first rung of the ladder to finding a job. There's so much more that could be done with the migrant levy to help people do that. Thirdly, if you're about creating a harmonious community, it's about helping new migrants understand the culture and the customs that exist in New Zealand. So there's a huge demand on the migrant levy. And this government is going to double the migrant levy. But is it going to double the migrant levy in this legislation to help people settle more readily? No. They got caught out in this bill. And who did they get caught out by? The Legislation Advisory Committee chaired by Sir Grant Hammond. He said the current migrant levy is for the sole purpose of research into migration and helping settlement, and he said it's not a tax. But he said this new immigration levy is simply a tax. It's going to fund immigration infrastructure that is normally met out of general revenue. So here is this government that talks so much about looking after ethnic communities that is doubling the amount of money that they're ripping off the migrants coming in, not to spend on helping them to settle, but to pay for the normal bureaucracy of the Immigration New Zealand division. That is dishonest, and they got caught out by the Legislation Advisory Committee. This is not my words that this is a tax. This is Sir Grant Hammond's word. He doesn't have a political axe to grind, but he knows a scam when he sees one, and this has got scam written all over it. Now, I want to come to the question of exploitation. You know, it's hard to believe that the government really is concerned about the appalling exploitation that is happening. Why? Well, the first thing is, every piece of employment legislation that has come before this House has been designed to remove protections. They've taken away the statutory right to a lunch break and to smoko breaks. They have made it harder for the unions to gain access to the workplace. How can the unions find out about exploitation when those employers who are unscrupulous are not going to allow them into the workplace? And they've absolutely undermined collective bargaining, and collective bargaining is the way in which people who are working honestly in the workforce can protect their rights. So not only has the government taken away these protections for migrants, they've taken it away for all New Zealanders. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you want to stop exploitation, you need to detect it. How do you detect it? Well, the International Labour Organisation says that a labour inspectorate is the way to do it, and that in an advanced country like New Zealand, there should be one labour inspector per 10,000 workers. One per 10,000 workers. Do you know what the actual ratio of the labour inspectorate to workers is in New Zealand? Mr Hudson, do you know? It's not 1 to 10,000, it's 1 to 56,000. We don't come anywhere near the international standards for protecting our workforce against exploitation. Even the Aussies, it's 1 to 19,000. The Aussies are 3 times better off than we are. So if the government really wants to stop exploitation by the unscrupulous employer, not the majority of employers, but by the unscrupulous employer, then surely they would strengthen the Labour Inspectorate. Nothing in this bill, nothing in the declared intentions of government to address that problem. The third area, sir, is the one that I talked about before. If you want to give migrant workers the chance genuinely to come forward, make it easy for them. Don't make them go to the agency that's there to enforce visa conditions. Let them go to the Labour Inspectorate. There's something else that could be done. Some years ago, I was involved with a piece of legislation called the Protected Disclosures Act. It was quite good for its time. Now it needs modernising, updating, it needs strengthening. And it needs to apply as strongly in the private sector as it does in the public sector. And there is nothing here for that. Sir, when I go through the litany of cases about people being exploited, I see what we fought against, or our forebears fought against, in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I see people that pay their employers for the privilege of working, because having a job is a condition of their visa to be in New Zealand. I see cases of people being paid $2 an hour, $5 an hour. I'm not making this up. These are case studies that have been published. And that exploitation is getting worse as our migrant population increases and as our student population with work visas increases. It is a disgrace in New Zealand to see that sort of exploitation. What we need is a real effort, not the window dressing that this bill represents.
I call Brett Hudson.